Hey there, welcome to episode 93, the first episode of the Social Business Engine podcast in 2016. I'm your host, Bernie Borges of Find and Convert. On the Social Business Podcast, you know that I showcase thought leaders from all industries who want to share their insights and experiences with you about social technology and best practices across the entire spectrum of an enterprise. On the first episode of 2016, you're going to meet Julio Viscovich, Vice President of Marketing at rFactr. Julio is a Forbes Top 30 social media influencer. He is passionate about helping organizations empower employees to have human-to-human engagement while delivering the right message at the right time. Julio has worked with many brands to develop employee advocacy programs that deliver tangible business results. And that's what we're going to talk about on this episode, how to deliver tangible business results through employee advocacy. We're going to discuss highlights from a strategic e-guide published by rFactr on implementing and scaling an employee advocacy program. Now, this episode is in cooperation with IBM, with whom we've published Social Business Journal Volume 6, titled Inclusive Design in a Cognitive Era, Reinventing Enterprise Email to Make Workplaces More Productive, Efficient, and Humane. This journal is available as an ungated download at our website, socialbusinessengine.com. Of course, that means there's no form to fill out. You can also get this journal right from the show notes page for this episode. And now, here's my interview with Julio Viscovich, Vice President of Marketing at rFactr. Julio, welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast.
Thanks, Bernie. It's a pleasure to be here. And, I think if you and I hadn't met in person, I'd still be thinking I'm speaking with Casey Kasem right now.
Well, I have heard that before. So I always have a little fun with that. So that's cool. And you're right, Julio. We have met in person. We met at the Social Media Strategy Summit last year in San Francisco. That was a whole lot of fun. I saw you speak, and I knew that both with your communication skills and your expertise in this topic that I wanted to have you on my podcast. So, Julio, let's start. For those that may not be familiar with the company that you're with, rFactr, why don't we begin our conversation there? Just give us a brief introduction of rFactr.
Yeah, sure, Bernie. I mean, our internal motto at rFactr is really helping organizations monetize their marketing content. I think everybody has a similar problem. They're all sitting there thinking we have a ton of marketing content. We've built it out. We've put years, months, if not years of work into this, and we have no way to really distribute it and get it to our employees or our sales reps and have them share it out. So what rFactr does is it's a employee advocacy platform that allows organizations and marketers to finally have a way to get their social media content in front of their organization and allow them to share it out and actually see impactful results.
All right, cool. That was nice and succinct. I appreciate that. Now, Julio, employee advocacy is not a new concept. In fact, I contributed to Content Marketing Institute's annual predictions of content marketing for 2016. And my prediction was that even though employee advocacy is not a new concept, it is gaining the momentum that it really deserves in modern marketing. So let's begin our conversation with where I usually like to begin, and that is revisiting the why of employee advocacy. Can you explain why is employee advocacy such a strategic initiative to any organization?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be in this day and age. I mean, the answer is simple. In this day and age, consumers are wary of marketers and advertisements. I mean, it's why we all choose to go to sites like Yelp or TripAdvisor when we're making decisions. And just like that, people have lost trust in corporate marketing. Like it or not, that's just the way it is. There's a study that comes out each and every year that a company called Edelman's Digital puts out, and they do something called the Trust Barometer. And what they do with the Trust Barometer is gauge where consumers' trust is lying when they're making purchase decisions. And each and every year, and we're finally at an actual maximum on it right now, is trust has flipped. It's flipped away from traditional marketing means, from marketing communications, from emails, from going to the company website, and it's now more put into third-party folks who can give credibility and who don't have a direct attachment to the brand. So the more we're sharing out of our people versus our corporate channels, then the more likely that message is going to be received. And in fact, our data is actually telling us that messages that come from real people versus from corporate entities or logos actually have a 7 times more likelihood to be engaged with. So as a marketer, you got to start thinking about, how can I engage my people? How can I take my message and amplify it the right way? And I think that's why advocacy is so important. It's to tap into that trust and leverage employees who are already using social media to a brand's advantage and deliver a consistent message through them.
Mm-hmm. Now, Julie, you said something that I want to come back to. You said that we have flipped. The Edelman barometer, trust barometer has flipped, and we're more inclined to believe or trust what third-party people are saying. Now, of course, employees are part of the brand. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to segue our conversation to a part of that's in your e-guide where you talk about the 4 major considerations when launching a social advocacy or an employee advocacy program. And I'd like you to touch upon like the value of the employee, even though they're not independent, they're part of the brand, but maybe within the context of those 4 major considerations, you can comment on that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, when you're thinking about rolling out a program, there's so many things that go into it, into making sure that it's done successfully. And I've been through it all. I've seen people fall on their face, and I've seen people do it the right way. And I think if I could look at all of that and draw it up into one experience and say there's 4 main successful considerations to take into account, it's first of all, program adoption. Your employees come first. How are you going to get them to adopt the program? And that has to be the goal of what you're measuring first.
So in other words, it's optional, right? They don't have to adopt it. You can't, cram it down employees' throats.
You can't cram it down employees' throats. There's a way to do it properly. And hey, don't get me wrong. I do see very close in the near future as a social media system like this, or a social media management program or system taking the place of phone and email, or fitting in with phone and email. It's a necessary form of communication. So I think not being able to jam it down their throats, of course, is necessary. And I think that's why we really have to consider what's in it for the employees, and really make sure that when you roll out a program, you focus on what's in it for them. Mm-hmm. The professional development they're going to get out of it, the thought leadership they're going to get out of it. And, of course, as an employer, you never want to have somebody leave. But if you can actually put somebody on a pedestal where they're out there getting job offers each and every day, and they can go tell those folks to pound sand because they're enjoying where they're at, then that's really what your goal of having a true employee advocate is.
Yeah, that's a great point. Go pound sand. I love where I work.
Right?
Okay, so point number 1 in the 4 major considerations is program adoption.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's just making sure that you get the right people on board. Focus on users who are already using social media. It's going to be an easy way to get word of mouth going within the organization. And I think moving past that, another consideration is, how are you going to impact the brand? And it usually results in brand awareness, and overall sentiment of the brand increases. Anytime you activate your employees to share your content, you're going to notice a huge spike in awareness. And if you're measuring things like CPM or CPC, if you're a marketer and you're looking at your costs, you're going to really see that you have a far more reach, engagement, and amplification out of your employees than you will through paid and sponsored ads. So from a cost justification standpoint, you're going to see that. And I also think that social training is necessary. And as marketers, this is the thing that scares us the most, is we are going to take our message and our work and turn it over to our entire employee base and ask them to share on our behalf.
Yeah.
Right? That's scary. So having training in place and making sure that you're measuring the progressions of your employees is super important, because as they progress and get more training and they learn how to add context to messaging, or they learn how to engage as a facing employee, then you want to be able to give them access to new features and empower that.
Okay, so can you cover the fourth one? I want to come back to social media training, though, but let's cover the fourth one so I don't disrupt your flow too much.
And the fourth one, I think, is the most important one, and it's what everybody forgets to measure or consider, and that's lead generation and revenue attribution. If you're going to have your employees sharing content and driving more awareness and reach, that's great. That's fluffy metrics that your boss might be happy with.
Mm-hmm.
But what's really going to drive business value and what's really going to drive somebody to get promoted is when you can show business value, ROI, and the impact on the bottom line. So I think if you're going to put in a program regarding social media advocacy and having employees share content, then you need to make sure you select a platform or have a way to figure out what's coming out of it, how many leads are being generated, how much revenue can be attributed to the program. And that comes from making sure that you select a technology that plugs in with your existing systems, like your CRM, marketing automation platforms, etc.
Right. Okay. So actually, I was going to ask about that, and you've really just hit on that. And that is, you've got to have the social technologies in place. We, of course, talk about that here on this podcast quite a bit. Social technologies is just one element of social business. You can't do social business or be a social business without having the right technologies in place to implement strategies like employee advocacy, employee ambassador programs like we're discussing here, so that you can do things like measure the impact on the bottom line. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I want to come back to social media training, as I threatened earlier. You've got so much experience, Julio, in rolling out employee advocacy programs. Can you share maybe some of the good, bad, and the ugly as it relates to social media training? Because I can tell you, just from an agency perspective, as we work with our clients, that we've seen some good and bad and ugly. But people are here to hear from you, not from me. So I'd love to hear some more stories, or just, again, good, bad, and ugly on how to approach social media training.
Yeah, absolutely. Training is so necessary, just because so much can go wrong. This is not like making a phone call or an email. When you put out a message on social media, it has potential to reach thousands, tens of thousands, or perhaps even millions of people. So ensuring training is rolled out properly is so essential. And that means teaching folks the best practices of what networks they're going to be using, how they should speak, roll out, and it's very important to roll out company policy. You have to understand what is acceptable for employees to do, to say, and what is not. And that has to be set in black and white, and that should be involved in the training from day one. And that's going to really set the bar and make sure that everybody is working together in unison. And of course, always seeking to train and improve is going to be part of having the buy-in and the professional growth and development that your employees are seeking for. So helping them understand how they can improve, how they can optimize their profiles, how they can share content with context so that it makes sense for their specific audience and they're not just another node sharing the same message of your company. So I think all of those things play in, and they're so necessary into making sure that you can trust your employees, that a PR disaster isn't going to happen, and they can make the biggest impact. Because I think there's so much content floating out there that now we're in a different stage. We're in a stage of adding context to that content and figuring out how can we stand out from the thousands of posts that are being created every single second. And training is so necessary to help drive that.
Now, have you seen social media training? Well, how have you seen it done? Have you seen it done in like webinar style, classroom style? Have you seen it one and done style? Week-long style, month-long style? Maybe you can just kind of comment on what are some of the best ways that you've seen social media training delivered?
I think it has to be delivered on an ongoing basis. And why I say that is because unlike any other industry I've ever worked in, I've never seen something change so rapidly and so quickly. You
Yeah.
can wake up the next day and all of a sudden all the features are gone. Or they're switched around. I mean, the training it's so necessary. I mean, Facebook just added live streaming video a few days ago, and that was a shocker to me. So, making sure that not only are folks trained initially on basic and advanced courses on the networks they're going to be using, but also refreshers are necessary. So I think making sure you have a certification program that requires re-upping at your organization, I think is a good approach to it. And I have certainly seen people fall flat on their face. And in that case, I think it's because they failed to choose a mixed training method where they went with just videos that you could access on demand. And what that creates is an element of people having 2 or 3 screens open, having their email, watching TV at the same time, and not really taking in anything that's transformational. Mm-hmm. And to kind of even take it to the next step, not only is it not transformational, but it doesn't give employees a chance to ask questions so that they really can drill in and understand concepts. So I think it has to be a mixed approach. There can be a sentiment of, online and accessible on-demand training, but it has to be coupled with some type of webinar or in-person training to make it really effective, I think.
Okay, terrific. Thank you for that. So in your e-guide, there's a section that reviews 3 tips to activate the plan. You actually touched on one of them already, but if you would, just kind of walk through those 3 tips for activating an employee advocacy program.
Yeah, I mean, the launching, Bernie, is the most difficult part. That's where most people fall flat on their face, is because they don't communicate it and actually launch the program properly. And as we mentioned, I mean, you're asking your employees to be now advocates and messengers on behalf of the company. And you have to consider a few different things to make sure that that works. The first one is what's in it for them. You have to really understand what's in it for them before you launch this program and make sure that that's built into your communications. Rolling it out and saying, hey, we want you to just, be a messenger on our brand isn't going to work. But if you come across with a, hey...
I'm groaning, Julio, because I've seen that. I've seen that so many times, and it's frustrating. So
it is.
I'm giving you a big amen on that one.
Well, thank you. And that's the most difficult part, and that's what people don't get. I mean, if you have different roles in your organization, have a different communication strategy for each of those roles and let them know what's in it for them. We're going to help you build thought leadership. We're going to help you position yourself as a leader in your niche. Those are the things that people want to hear versus, hey, why don't you join the advocacy program?
Right. So you can tweet for us and promote our stuff.
Yeah. Sounds great, doesn't it? And then, of course, what goes along with that is how you market the program, how you actually reach out and introduce your program to your employees. And that's one of the bigger parts as well, is involving your employees in that process. Come up with something snappy and fun as a name of your program that people want to be a part of, not Company A Employee Advocacy Program. Come up with something snappy. Mm-hmm. And to take it even to the next level, why don't you crowdsource it and ask your employees to help create the name of the program, invest them from day one.
Yeah, great idea. Absolutely.
And then I think the last part of that is just how you're going to go about your outreach strategy. I think you have to really have an approach that is going to maximize the adoption of the program. So I think the first thing you would do is find out who's active on social. Maybe it's a quick audit, maybe it's a quick survey, or maybe even know off the top of your head who's active today. Because they're going to be the folks that are first to jump in, first to be on board, and first to promote the program internally. Mm-hmm. And then I think going beyond that, how else can you introduce it? Is it via, an email newsletter? Is it at your next quarterly meeting? How can you get this in front of the employees and get their buy-in? And I think if you mix those 3 elements, you have a very successful recipe for launch.
Okay, terrific. You've already sort of alluded to my next topic that I want to cover with you, and it's a topic that we've covered here a few times here on this podcast, and that's the role of content in employee advocacy. Of course, employees can only be effective in being an ambassador, both for themselves and for the brand, if they have some content to share. So you want to talk to the role of content in an employee advocacy strategy?
Of course, because content is the absolute bullseye of a successful program. Content is what makes it go. If you don't have a steady flow of content, if you don't have targeted content for your buyer personas, and you're putting out content that isn't strategically aligned with your organization's goals, then that's a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing is, now when we look at all the content out there, I think there's a statistic that says in 48 hours. Us as the human race create the same amount of content that was created from cavemen up until 2006 or something like that. It's insane.
It's mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling for sure. So how do you stand out, right? If you think of like BuzzFeed, for example, that's a company that just came out of nowhere, and it's because they were able to create content that was different, unique, and people enjoyed. And I think that's a struggle that people are facing is, okay, if we're going to share content, how do we make it impactful? And I think that's through, best practices in each of the social networks that you're using. And I think going beyond that, one of the biggest challenges is how does a company find third-party content? Because we all know that you can't just sell all day long. You can't just promote your company. You have to promote it with other forms of content, which is why I think I always recommend a 4-1-1 formula. For every 6 posts that an employee puts out, 4 of them should be completely unrelated to the company. They should be third-party thought leadership articles that help develop the employee. One of those pieces should be a piece of content from the company, so a landing page, a blog post, a webinar, etc. And then 1 post should be about that individual that shows a little bit of a human side about that person. Mm-hmm. And if you maintain that formula, then you're going to maintain a valuable relationship with your followers, and you're going to be consistent, and you're not going to be seen as somebody who oversells. Mm-hmm. And I think the last point I'll make on that is, as a lot of the folks that I've worked with don't have third-party content. They don't understand how they're going to be able to put the time together to vet all of this third-party content and put it into the system. And I think one of the things that we've done to kind of solve that is we recently did a partnership with Forbes to be able to offer our advocacy solution out of the box, preloaded and updated in real time with Forbes content, so that we have third-party content for organizations to share and help build thought leadership. And I think finding a way to get that content is absolutely necessary.
Cool. So partnering. Awesome. Love that idea. Okay, Julio, in the last section, before I get to my recap of our conversation, let's talk about the 3 phases of implementation and measurement. And if you could just kind of quickly just, hit the treetops on what those 3 phases are and kind of speak to the importance of each one of them.
Yeah, anyone thinking about exploring employee advocacy, probably the first thing that you want to care about and consider is cost justification. If you're trying to get a budget, I think it's really key to be able to present, hey, this is how much we're saving here. If we're spending on paid and sponsored ads and we actually empower our employee base to amplify our content, we're going to see a huge reduction in CPC and CPM. So I think that's something to consider. I think tracking your training is also, we talked about the importance of training, but understanding where everybody is along the process is key, so that you know who's becoming a more advanced user and you're able to give them more functionality, add the ability to create context around posts, etc.
Julia, do you mean tracking how people are doing after they've been trained? So employee A, B, and C are doing well, but D, E, and F are not doing so well, and providing some detail around that?
I think it's key to have an LMS, a learning management system set up that helps you understand where your different employees are from a skill set perspective. Okay. You may have someone that's very diverse in social versus someone who's very advanced. And knowing where they are, you're able to provide them the right tools or perhaps turn on different sets of functionality to get the most out of that employee.
I would imagine you can also learn what aspects of training are working well and what aspects of training are not working so well, so you can make adjustments.
That's exactly it. And as we know, as marketers, it's all about optimization and iterating things until you get it done right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the last thing, Bernie, I think to just touch on quickly from a measurement perspective is that ROI and revenue attribution. Make sure that if you're going to invest in a platform, that it does have connectivity to your CRM and other valuable systems, because you are going to come to a point when you're asked to justify and you're asked to go beyond fluffy metrics like reach, awareness, and into business value and leads and opportunities and revenue. So consider that. And I think those would be the three things I would say from a measurement and tracking perspective.
Okay, terrific. No fluff, no fluff. It's all about ROI.
That's exactly it, Bernie. That's exactly it.
All right, terrific. Well, Julia, we are at a point in my podcast where I want to do a recap of the key points that you just covered. And we are here talking about employee advocacy. We started a conversation, Julia, with a brief introduction of your company, rFactr, where you are a software platform with services where you help clients monetize the marketing content through employee advocacy. That's what gives you the expertise that you have in this conversation. So we talked about why employee advocacy is important. You mentioned that consumers are weary of brands and logos. People have lost trust in the messages that come from the logo. I call it the logo. And data like the Edelman's Trust Barometer really has proved in data that people are not responding to corporate marketing communications. People respond to what other people are saying. In fact, you say that messages from real people are 7 times more likely to produce engagement. We then talked about the 4 major considerations in launching an employee advocacy program, and they are the adoption of the program, focusing on what's in it for the employee and getting the right people on board, especially in the early days of a new program, building brand awareness and brand sentiment, and how you can see a spike in awareness and measure the cost per thousand and the reach that you're driving through employees. The third item was social media training. We talked a lot about the importance of training and how you want to teach people best practices, how they should speak and behave and engage, providing a documented company policy on how to engage in social so that they really understand how to share content and, again, how to engage. The training should be delivered on an ongoing basis. I think that's a really key point, with refreshers and even a certification program. And then also consider having mixed training methods along the way so that you can measure which aspects of the training work really well and which don't work so well. And the fourth element was lead generation and revenue attribution, which is really where the rubber meets the road in employee advocacy, showing the business value and the impact on the bottom line. And you mentioned so astutely that you've got to have social technologies in place in order to be able to measure the impact on the business. And then we talked about 3 tips to activate an employee advocacy program. And you came back to the point of you've got to really focus on what's in it for the employee and build that into the communication so that they understand that's clear to them. And then how are you going to market the program? How are you going to introduce it? Consider giving it a fun name. Consider crowdsourcing that name. I love that idea. And then the third tip is your outreach strategy. You want to maximize adoption of the program. And then we talked about the role of content and how content needs to be a steady flow of targeted content in order for the employees to actually engage through social. And it's got to be content that stands out, and how companies struggle sometimes finding third-party content that's relevant. And you mentioned that brands should consider partnering with third parties. You mentioned how you're partnering with Forbes for third-party content. And then, of course, you talked about the 4-1-1 rule and sharing content, where for every 6 pieces of content, 4 should be from a third party, 1 from your brand itself, and then 1 about yourself. So I love that. The 4-1-1 rule is something that I've heard about in the past, and I think that is just so brilliant. And then the last thing we discussed was the 3 phases of implementation of employee advocacy. And they are cost justification, tracking the success of the program, and revenue attribution. So, Julio, before I ask you my final one-thing question, did I leave anything out in my summary?
That was absolutely phenomenal, and you nailed it, Bernie.
All right, great. So, my one-thing question, Julio, is what is one thing you'd like to leave my listeners with as an actionable takeaway from this conversation about employee advocacy?
I think it's that realizing that your employees are your biggest asset as a marketer versus thinking that you have to do everything, finding out a way to tap into your employee base and make sure that for every communication and every part of that process. You make sure that your employees are at the heart of it instead of your brand, and it's going to be successful.
Terrific. Employees are your biggest asset. Tap into them, put them at the core, the heart of your marketing strategy, if you will, content strategy.
Exactly.
Love it. So, Julio, before we segue to the closing here, where would you like to send people online to learn more about you and fun and interesting things that you're doing at rFactr?
Yeah, there's a few spots that I'm online pretty regularly. I'm on Twitter. You can find me there at Julio Visco, JulioVisko. You can find me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/social selling. And of course, you can learn more about rFactr at rFactr.com. That's rFactr.com.
rFactr.com. I love the spelling. And of course, Julia, my listeners know that everything that you just mentioned, including a link to this e-guide, will be linked up in our show notes page on our website at socialbusinessengine.com. So, Julio, thank you so much for jumping on this podcast with me here today to talk about how to roll out an employee advocacy strategy.
This was my pleasure, Bernie. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Well, I want to remind everyone that this episode was published in cooperation with IBM, where we have published Social Business Journal Volume 6, titled Inclusive Design in a Cognitive Era, Reinventing Enterprise Email to Make Workplaces More Productive, Efficient, and Humane. This journal is available as an ungated download on our website at the journals page, and of course, it's also going to be linked up on the show notes for this episode. Hey, if you're subscribed by email to get our weekly podcast updates that we send every Friday, then this journal has already been emailed to you. And if you're not subscribed to our weekly updates by email and you want to be, just hit our subscribe page at our website at socialbusinessengine.com. If you are a regular listener to the Social Business Engine podcast, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, well, thank you as well. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you'll push the subscribe button on your podcast player so that you don't miss future episodes. And if you're an iTunes subscriber, I would be very grateful if you would write a review and share your sentiments about this podcast, and that review will help others discover it. We have a direct link to this podcast on iTunes at socialbusinessengine.com/iTunes. And lastly, I invite you to engage with me on social media. I'm at Twitter at Bernie Borges. This podcast is on Twitter at SB Engine. We also have a Facebook page, appropriately named facebook.com/socialbusinessengine. And you can follow our hashtag SBE Show. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. I want to thank my guest once again, Julio Viskovich, Vice President of Marketing at rFactr. This is Bernie Borges of Find and Convert, wishing you continued success on your social business journey.